John Carpenter's Apocalypse Trilogy. John Carpenter has made many important films, at least if you're a fan of cult or horror films. Halloween, Escape from New York, Christine, and Big Trouble in Little China are just a few of his most popular works. But there's one set of films in Carpenter's catalog that are particularly important and deeply disturbing. I'm referring to Carpenter's Apocalypse Trilogy, a set of films that began in 1982 with the genre-defining and utterly terrifying The Thing, continued through the 80s with Prince of Darkness, and ended in the mid-90s with In the Mouth of Madness. At first glance, the films appear to have little in common except for their director. However, it's clear that there's a common thread at the heart of each one. Each film forces its characters to combat not only a visible enemy, but also an invisible one that may be immune to the nature of what they believe to be reality. In fact, reality becomes a kind of twisted enemy. And each film features characters who are physically trapped, cut off from society with no clear possibility of escape. In The Thing, it's a remote Antarctic research facility. In Prince of Darkness, it's a church in the middle of desolate downtown Los Angeles, and in the Mouth of Madness, it's a small town that could be in another dimension but affects our own. But more importantly, the backbone of each film is based on a theme of cosmic horror, a genre essentially invented by the writer H.P. Lovecraft. And it's no secret that Carpenter is a fan of this author. In an analysis of the three films, it is found that the definition of cosmic horror is best summed up in a letter from Lovecraft. Now, all my stories are based on the fundamental premise that ordinary human laws, interests, and emotions have no validity or meaning in the vast cosmos at large. In pursuit of knowledge. In The Thing, the alien invader isn't a stalking creature but a human clone. In Prince of Darkness, the biblical devil isn't really of this world, and in the Mouth of Madness, Carpenter pulls off what might be the greatest meta-horror trick of all time, turning his villain into the film's own author. In all three films, we have protagonists who are seeking knowledge. The plot of The Thing follows pilot R.J. McCready, who is part of a scientific research team in Antarctica. In Prince of Darkness, a mysterious cult cylinder is investigated, and in The Edge of Madness, an insurance salesman investigates the mystery of a missing author and its impact on readers. Each and every one of these quests leads to paranoia and places the characters on the brink of possible destruction. But what's interesting about these films is that the apocalypse is both external and internal. While the strange beings attack and kill everything around them, these characters lose certainty of their own identity. The Thing and social paranoia. In The Thing, knowledge of the outside world forces the characters to look inward. They push themselves to the limit in a desperate attempt to survive, and sometimes this involves attacking others. I pose the following questions. Do you really know yourself? If you were trapped in Antarctica with an alien who took the form of your companions, which of the characters would you identify with? McCready or Childs, or Blair, or any of the others who accused McCready? But be honest. A more mundane example, if you were trapped in an elevator, how would you react? Or if you were suddenly trapped on the subway in a tunnel, and the doors wouldn't open and there was suddenly smoke, what would you be like there? So again, do you really know yourself? Our protagonist, McCready, is human, or so it seems. On the one hand, his paranoia infects us, and we want to judge the rest of the characters alongside him to discover who has been duplicated by the aliens. But we're not sure if McCready is actually human, and both Carpenter and screenwriter Bill Lancaster deliberately choose not to confirm at the end of the film whether McCready is still human. The plot of The Thing is one of distrust in others and in oneself, which definitely leads to paranoia. The destruction comes not only from the danger posed by this being reaching urban areas, but also from the deconstruction of each character's identity and the loss of individuality. Without a doubt, his story puts human nature to the test. The Prince of Darkness and the Death of God. The premise of The Prince of Darkness becomes cosmic when it explains the existence of God and a religious apocalypse as a misinterpretation of the alien force that wants to destroy us. Jesus is actually a human-shaped alien who came to Earth to warn us about the devil, who is also an alien. So, a father enlists the help of Professor Howard Byrak to investigate a mysterious alien cylinder. The liquid in the cylinder turns out to be Satan, and, as expected, he ends up possessing the team of scientists involved one by one. References to Mary's pregnancy by the Holy Spirit. The genius of this cosmic horror film is its relationship to a fundamental characteristic of human development, spirituality. Religion and spirituality have been part of humanity for as long as we have been able to reason, and questioning spirituality, both individually and collectively, is fundamental to questioning existence. John Carpenter writes and directs a story that creates a clash between science, spirituality, and the cosmos to highlight human vulnerability. And of course, when human beings confront their own vulnerability in such a violent and terrifying way, they end up losing their sanity. So far, John Carpenter's Apocalypse trilogy has already destroyed the idea of the individual and their society, as well as God and the limits of science. In the Mouth of Madness and the Loss of Reality. The story follows an insurance salesman, John Trent, who must investigate whether the disappearance of the famous author Sutter Kane is actually a ruse to collect insurance. So far, nothing special. It could be anyone. The interesting part comes when Kane's readers start acting strangely. Trent ends up visiting Hobbs End, a town that featured in many of Kane's stories. Here, Trent finds himself trapped in a place that seems lost between fiction and reality. But as the plot progresses, we learn that Kane is not a simple fiction author, he is actually writing a reality that his readers join when they become too immersed in his stories. A reality to which, unbeknownst to him, Trent already belongs. The protagonist begins by investigating the truth about Kane, but this drives him to the madness of questioning general reality, a particularly hard blow for a cynic like Trent. What is real and what is fiction? By the end of the film, the audience and Trent aren't so sure anymore. Of course, that doesn't really matter, because the apocalypse is stalking humanity and, unlike the other two films in this trilogy, it cannot be stopped. This is one of those stories that suggest our reality could be manipulated by greater forces, just as the writer manipulates his fictional novel. So, we have three apocalyptic films that deconstruct three foundations of human existence: identity, spirituality, and perception of reality. They are cosmic horror stories that definitely give us the creeps with all that Lovecraftian influence. Separately, they have a lot to say, but together they make a combination of destruction and apocalypse. And to conclude, looking back, do you still think McReady could have survived? But if he does, what would have been the point of this being the first film in a human apocalypse trilogy? The reason would have to be imposed by developing the unfinished story of the film, showing that McReady died, Childs just had to wait for him to die, and finally Childs arrives to civilization to start the apocalypse of the human race, and quite possibly of every living being on the planet.